One of the other things we did is once in a while we had an opportunity to do a training target, what we call training targets. I had no control over training targets because being a remote viewer, I don't get to pick and choose my targets. I never did because I'm blind to them. You know, they just happen. So I'm as mystified by the results of my remote viewing as is anyone else. They're always a surprise to me. So when I go in and do a remote viewing, whatever happens, happens. The other part of denying the ego is that you never try to understand what's happening. You never try to classify what's happening, or you certainly never try to judge or come to some conclusion about your data. You just go with it because it's not your job. One of the things I learned a long time ago is that that's somebody else's job to figure out what it is you said or figure out what it is you meant. There's some other things in a minute that you'll see, and I'll explain to you why that's important. Or the data will explain to you why that's important. The Clearwater, Missouri, March 27, 1973 UFO sighting occurred in a dam and reservoir area. It's kind of an interesting sighting because there were a lot of things going on, and somebody suggested that it be targeted by remote viewers, I guess. I don't know who suggested it or why, but it wound up being one of our training targets. And I don't know who else might have targeted or didn't, but this is my result of that targeting. That's the dam area. The red lines are basically my perceptual area. So imagine, in a remote viewing sense, me standing on the dam, and that would be my view as a remote viewer, looking away from the dam. And my first perception was an object moving that way, a light, big light, about the size of a small aircraft carrier. My second perception was a whole bunch of lights arriving and then imploding, not exploding, but imploding. 4 of them arrived on a mountaintop and then imploded. I was very specific about that. So I had a sense that they just kind of arrived together and imploded. Very strange. Next perception was another aircraft carrier went by from right to left. Big, bright, white aircraft carrier, size light. Third impression was the arrival of 2 big circular lights that came together in the form of a figure 8 and kind of wobbled there, doing a dance. And at that point, my monitor suggested that I join it. That sounded like a pretty good idea. I said, okay, lights are kind of interesting. I think I'll just kind of slip on out there and see what the light's all about. At which point I had an out of body. It's just like being snapped right on my body. Bang. And I found myself sitting in a white cube. Perfectly white cube, opaque, very bright, with no windows or doors, just a pure white cube. And no way to get out, and no way of knowing how I got in. So I started looking for a seam or a door or a window, and couldn't seem to find one. So I thought, oh, time to go back to my body now. And nothing happened. Oops. Started getting nervous. Being basically very curious, I kept looking and started getting more nervous, at which time a apparition of my father beamed in, like in Star Trek, beamed in. Problem is, my father had been dead about 2 years, and he, in a very gruff voice, pointed his hand over my shoulder. "Leave, you don't belong here." And I went, "Nice try. Whoever you are, it is not going to work." Because my dad's never raised his voice to me. My mother did, but not my dad. And my dad looked very confused for a moment and then beamed out. And I started looking a lot harder for the seam. And then these two light beings appeared, or one light being appeared. It looked very humanoid in shape, but had no face, just a light outline. And it folded into two of itself, and my perception was it was arguing with itself. And that really made me feel uncomfortable. And it raised an appendage, and a light beam shot out of its appendage and hit me in the chest. And I felt a moment of panic, and then I said, I got angry. And I said, "Get out of here. I'm tired of this." And it argued some more and winked out. And I started hammering on the side of this box, this cube. And then stood there thinking, this is too bizarre. And then I had a sense that something reached inside my chest and started feeling around, messing around inside my chest. And you know when you strum a guitar string with your nail? Well, something found a nerve inside me and strummed it, and I was instantly, violently ill, like I was going to projectile vomit. That's when I sat bolt upright in my body and collided heads with my monitor. And we're both running around a remote viewing room holding our heads. And we terminated a remote viewing session because we didn't know what was going on. So that's the remote viewing event. Total time was 15 minutes. Felt like an hour. And I haven't a clue what was going on at that particular remote viewing site. I do know that that was definitely multidimensional. It was not what I call a classic UFO event. In May of 1984 at the Monroe Institute, I had been training with Bob for almost 14 months, learning to control my out-of-body experiences. I had had spontaneous out-of-bodies for many years, and Bob had been training with me in his lab at the last year of my time at the project, Stargate project, to teach me to control my out-of-bodies. I wanted to see if controlled out-of-bodies were better at producing information, collection information, than remote viewing. It turns out you can do very specific things with out-of-bodies that you can't do with remote viewing, but I don't think it's as good. If you want to know how the trigger mechanism works on a Chinese nuclear weapon, out-of-body's better because you can go to the Chinese nuclear weapon and put your face in it, look around, do detailed drawing. But if you want to know where all the parts from the weapon came from, remote viewing's better because all the parts are intricately linked together data-wise. So things are different for how you want to do things. In any event, during that period, my training officer, Skip Atwater, would come in from the project and test me to see whether or not my remote viewing was getting any better. And one of his tests that he brought, one of the training tests that he brought, was a target that I didn't know anything about. Normally I did mundane targets like quasi-military targets. Well, this particular week he brought a Mars target. I didn't know it was a Mars target, but he gave a sealed envelope, neither did Bob Monroe, he gave a sealed envelope to Bob Monroe, which inside had a card that said Mars 1 million years BC. Bob thought it was another moon day target as well. And he had a list of coordinates. So Bob had this card in his shirt pocket, and we had a list of coordinates as targets. And the first set of coordinates was 44.89 degrees, 9.55 degrees west. I didn't know anything about the targets as I was laying in a dark black cube in the lab, floating on a sea of salt, listening to hemisync tapes. And the first thing I heard was the coordinates. And this was my response. I got a great view of a pyramid form, sitting in a large depression. It's yellowish, ochre colored. I get clouds, a severe storm, major geological trauma. Then I was asked to visit the site before the trauma. They said, go back before the trauma. They said all the dirt had disappeared. There were now smooth walls. Everything was flat, megalithic. I said something about, gee, is this a new pyramid? Did they discover a new pyramid? Because it's really large. Shadow of people, fragments, memory of people. They said, go back to when they were there. Large people, thin and tall, wearing strange clothes, skin tight, very tight, almost can't see them. This is the actual target based on the coordinates. That's the face everybody's always referring to on Mars. This is actually the depressed area. This is the pyramid. It's actually a double-layered pyramid. This is the second set of coordinates that I got. In a canyon looking up steep, high walls that go on forever. Very intricate, huge sections of smooth stone carved out. Getting very large structures. Rabbit warren of huge corridors and rooms. I said the rooms were really large, and again I said something to him about this has got to be some new pyramids or something, because I don't remember ever seeing rooms this size in Giza or anywhere like that. That's a canyon, and that's the pyramid. Now what's really interesting about this particular pyramid, you notice it's sitting on the side of the impact crater. And that's a real trick, because that means the pyramid had to be put there after the impact crater. Because if the impact crater hit after the pyramid was there, it would have destroyed the pyramid. You can't have one and not the other. You understand what I'm saying? If that crater appeared after the pyramid, it would have destroyed that pyramid. The other interesting thing about this picture is you can measure the shadow of the crater, and based on the angle of the sun, you can estimate the size of the crater wall as being 3,000 meters tall. So that's a pretty deep crater. Now look at the shadow on the pyramid. Pretty tall pyramid. That's a 20,000 meter tall pyramid. Pretty big, huh? That's not the only thing interesting. That pyramid had to have been formed after the crater was formed. Here's something else interesting. That pyramid's even closer to the edge. And here's an even more interesting fact. There's the road in, there's the road out. I just find these really remarkable pictures. Here's another, this is a general area. Pyramids huge, but different this time. The reason these were different is because they were a cluster. These are like shelters from storms. Designed for sleeping, I specified hibernation, sleeping through savage storms. I'm asked to find out why. They're an ancient people trying to survive. It's past their time and age. They're waiting for the return of someone sent to find a new home. Their world passed through the tail of a comet. I had a sense that their atmosphere was stripped away or destabilized when it passed through the tail of the comet. This is an old fort. Now what's interesting about the old fort, and it's something most people don't recognize, this is actually a pyramid. That's one side, that's the other side, that's the other side. The tip is missing off the top and it's hollow. I don't know if you can see that. Kind of interesting, isn't it? They call it the old fort. It's always referred to as the old fort. But that's a pyramid that's been tipped off. The tip's been taken off. That's a grouping of pyramids. And that's a building, or what's left of a building on a sort of a plateau. And that's the drawing I did of the larger beings. What I think in actuality, there really are no such thing as Martians. What I think Martians are is us. I think we're descendants of the original inhabitants of Mars. And we're the ones that never went back. Give you an idea of size, that's the rough size of the pyramid of Giza. Give you an idea of scale. So targeting events over time, if you want to go back and target things as a remote viewer, I selected some things. Now, when I did my collection of my material for Ultimate Time Machine, I decided I would target some things that are UFOs. The way I did the collection of the material for Ultimate Time Machine, it's very difficult to target yourself because you're front-loaded. So obviously when I collected the material for Ultimate Time Machine, I would be front-loading myself. So the way I did that is I laid the book out very deliberately. I got with a sociologist and some other people, and I laid out an outline for data, how data should be outlined. And under the outline, I wrote out what I thought would be the most interesting questions that people might ask about the future. And I came up with something like 300 or 400 questions. And I wrote each of those questions out on a 3x5 card. At the same time, I took some specific UFO events and I wrote those out on 3x5 cards and I threw those in the pile. And I put each of those 3x5 cards into a opaque envelope that you can't see through. And I put all those in one of those big green leaf bags. You seen those big green leaf bags? And I shook it up and put it in the corner of my office. And every day I'd take that green leaf bag and I'd shake it up and I'd pull a card out or an envelope and I'd put it up on my computer and I'd remote view it and I'd type out a paragraph or a page or I'd do a sketch or do whatever. And then I'd open the envelope, and if the question or whatever in the envelope matched whatever I had done, I'd file it and I'd tear up the card or I'd staple it to the data and file it. If it didn't, I'd put the card back in another envelope, stick it back in the leaf bag, and destroy the data. And I did that for 4 years. And that's how I got the data for Ultimate Time Machine. That's also how I got the data for what I'm going to show you. So it was kind of hard collecting the data. It was the only way I could stay blind to the material. You get enough of that and you pretty much stay blind. So the trick was finding real UFOs to target. I wanted real UFOs. things I could trust. The first one I picked was November 17, 1986, 1710, Japanese airline 747 cargo plane over Alaska. There's only three. I'm going to read them to you because you'll understand why I picked them. I wanted things that I absolutely knew were alien craft, not possibly ours, possibly theirs, possibly somebody else's. I wanted real alien craft. On November 17, 1986 at 1710, airline officer Kinju Terauchi, who was piloting a 747 cargo plane, first saw what he at first thought were lights coming from a military aircraft. During the next half hour, he and his crew realized that things of an unearthly nature had joined them in the skies. The pilot, first officer, and flight engineer saw two lighted structures about the same size as the body of a DC-8 jet. In Terauchi's words, moving about 1,000 feet in front of their cargo plane. Terauchi's radio communications to Anchorage Flight Control were strangely garbled, but enough got through that Anchorage urgently contacted a nearby Air Force radar station to see what they were picking up. At various times during the event, the UFOs were tracked by the 747 onboard radar and by the Air Force ground radar confirmed. As the sky darkened, the UFOs paced the 747 and were finally lost in a distant horizon. Then a pale white light appeared behind the aircraft, silhouetted against the lights on the ground. It looked like an immense Saturn-shaped object the size, Terauchi estimated, of two small aircraft carriers. He thought it was a mothership that had carried the two smaller objects themselves of no small size. The Anchorage radar was recording the object's presence all along. For the first time, the crew felt fear. By now, the aircraft was running low on fuel, and the captain requested permission to land in order to escape. The UFO finally vanished off radar at 1739. That's obviously an alien craft. So I targeted that one. November 7th, 1975, Malmstrom Air Force Base, Great Falls, Montana. On November 7, 1975, remote electronic sensors at Malmstrom Air Force Base, home of more than 20 Minuteman missiles, indicated that something had violated site security. Two officers were monitoring the signals called site security, who in turn dispatched a helicopter and a sabotage alert team to investigate. As the SAT team approached the area in question, they could see an orange glowing object. As they slowly closed in, they could see that the object was tremendous in size. They radioed to the launch control facility and informed them that they were witnessing a brightly glowing orange football field-sized disc. The SAT was ordered to proceed. They refused to do so. Now, I don't know a SAT team that's ever refused an order, except this one. The object started to rise slowly, and when it reached 1,000 feet, it was picked up on radar by NORAD, and as a result, two F-106 jet interceptors were launched immediately. As the jets approached, the object shot away vertically and was last seen on radar at 200,000 feet. The operators at Launch Control Facility noticed that the missiles were indicating that they had been tampered with. After a series of checks, it was established that all the missiles had had their target coordinates changed. That's obviously an alien craft. And the Clearwater Lake, Missouri incident, because it's a favorite of mine. So those are three I stuck in my leaf bag. I thought, what the heck? Those are definitely alien. I wanted to know more. This is the reason why I went out of my way to make sure I was targeting alien craft. This is a target. I used to have remote viewing get-togethers. I call them get-togethers. Back in 84, 85, 86. This is the copy of a target done in July of 85. This actually was drawn by someone as a target. That's all they drew. It was a double blind. The target was in a double wrapped opaque envelope. So I'd like to know what the target was. Cool, huh? Everybody jumped on it. UFO, aliens. The problem was, I will tell you the data that went along with this. They said, I'm getting a UFO, but it's really weird because when I went on board, it had normal instrumentation, just like a jet. And there were two guys in military uniforms, and they said, you don't belong here, get off. Interesting, huh? And I saved that. I kept it in my desk drawer. And when the first FY-117 was shown on television, I ran to my desk drawer and got that out. And it looked just like the first shots they showed us on television. When they rolled it out of the hangar, I went, whoa, is that cool or what? She even put wheels on it, for God's sake. That's how you can, I mean, we're mixing data all the time. That's why I really wanted to make sure I got alien crap. So, April 19, 1998, squares within squares. That's the first result I got, which I found very interesting since I spent so much time in an opaque white cube. Squares within squares. I've also gotten telephone booths. I've been inside telephone booths, or telephone booth-like places. Glass rooms inside glass rooms. I think probably it's a confounding place. It's a place designed to confound. It may even be a trick of the mind that they play, designed to muddle our senses. Trying to target a UFO, it may even be a screen. I said that remote viewers can't be blocked. You can't be. I didn't say you couldn't be deceived. One of the ways that you hide things from remote viewers is by hiding them within things that look similar. If you want to hide one of these from a remote viewer, what's the best place to hide it? In a pile of them. So one of these cubes is probably real, the rest aren't. One of the opaque cubes is probably real, the rest aren't. One of the aliens is probably real, the rest aren't. That's the best place to hide. You got to think of that. It's the other reason why remote viewers cannot be wedded to an idea. You have to stay completely unbiased in your data. You can't come to conclusions about the data. You can't say automatically they're from Gemini or Syria or wherever. You can't automatically assume anything about your data, because if you do, you're dead in the water. You will automatically start being prejudiced towards your data. April 6, 1998. The first line up here, I started out with, right here, cave, and I crossed it out and wrote analytic overlay. I actually thought I was drawing a picture of a cave originally. It was so big. This is the image of a human being, to give you an idea of scale. I think the lower portion is drive. That's all drive unit. And it's some kind of vehicle. I'm getting I always say a taste of these metals. It's approximate size. Weight, this is millions, 1.5 million pounds. It's really huge. And I think what this is probably an empty transport. I think all the really big ships are all motherships. They're all transport ships. And I don't think they do anything other than beam things in and beam things out. I think all their vehicles are interdimensional. They're time machines. They're portages. They come and they go. And I think the only time we see them is when they're coming and when they're going. The rest of the time they have an envelope or a way of hiding. Or they're just not here. They come and they go. That's their only function. They're carriers. It's the smaller ships are the ones that stick around. They're the ones that are brought in and leave, or left here rather. Those are the ones that we actually see more of. But the big ones, the motherships, are the ones that come and go. They're the ones that carry things in and carry things out. The transport vehicles. That's my sense of it anyway. This one's a little hard to see. This is kind of a figure eight, but it kind of waffles around the whole area. And this is, that word there is corona. It creates a corona around the vehicle. And that's actually the vehicle, I think. It's a sketch I was doing. And I think that figure eight is kind of a force field of some kind. That's a larger sense of it. And what it does is it creates you can't read the writing, I know. That's a corona. And that right there is, I call that a singularity. And that's the larger figure eight. And this narrows into the way it bends or twists space-time in some way. I'm not exactly sure how that works. It's just the way it feels or the way I sense it in the remote viewing. But that's the way the motherships come and go, maybe. I think they have two different kinds of drive. The star-to-star is the mothership, and the planetary is the smaller ships. They have the anti-gravity drives. Or better than anti-gravity, I think it's, they negate inertia, would be a better way to say it. By negating inertia, what that means is, it's better than anti-gravity. When you negate inertia, all you have to do is flick your little finger and you just keep moving the opposite direction till you flick your little finger in the other direction. So it takes no energy at all to do miraculous things. If you have no inertia in your body, you can basically lean in one direction and you just keep moving in the direction you lean until you lean the opposite direction. It's a better mode of mobility. This is how a drive works, I think. I don't understand it, I just write it down. This is the negative side, positive side. There's some kind of turbine force that runs this way. This is a liquid metal in here, but the liquid metal is made up of something I call neutral liquid nanometal, for lack of a different word. And they're individual little fragments so small you can't see them, but they're almost can't see them. They're individually designed to create a field, and there's a centrifuge force that pushes them to the outside of the field in some way. Maybe that's meaningful to somebody. Like I say, I just produce the data. I don't worry about how it works. Maybe that's meaningful to somebody. Somebody will get the tape and go, oh yeah, that helps. I don't know. Maybe it's a way of producing the corona or something. Alien sleeping pod. When you get inside the ship and you start looking for aliens, you almost never see one. And I think that's a deliberate problem. I think they know when you're looking at them or trying to look at them. The interesting thing about an alien sleeping pod is that I'm not sure if it's used for sleep. I'm not sure if that's what it is. My sense of it is it might be a rejuvenation pod or a sleeping pod or a hideout. I don't know what it is. But I do know that that's what they wear. That's a suit of some kind, a skin of some kind, an environmental unit of some kind when they're not in that pod. It's kind of interesting. The only other part of an alien I've ever seen is their hand on a control. It looks very much like our hand, the difference being it's long and it's thin and it has very ugly nails. Very pointed, very narrow. Wouldn't want to get in a cat fight with them unless I was armed. But they're very gentle with them. That's my sense. I've never seen a whole alien outside of a suit. I think a very tiny fraction of UFOs are alien aircraft. Very small fraction. Maybe 0.25%. I think the vast majority of UFOs are home-built. The reason I say that is because of all the damage they do. I think the actual alien craft are detuned to our time-space. So they don't do a lot of damage to our time-space. Except when they actually make contact with it, which is very rare. I think they're only visible when they're morphing in and out of our time-space. They deliberately avoid us otherwise. I think they make contact individually. They have a sense of who's open to contact and who isn't. And it's not who's open in a sense of who will really want to talk to them, but who's open in the sense of who's not going to run off and get something and whack them to death. Or who's not going to get ugly, or who's not going to have a coronary when they actually see one. Or who isn't going to turn them into, see what I got, or turn them into a mystical being or whatever. I think the larger ships are transports only. I think all of their ships are not built, they're grown. I think they're actually grown like crystals. I got a lot of remote viewing data on the ship's construction, but it's impossible to display. You can't draw it. It's even difficult to talk about. The ships communicate with the occupants. It's almost like organic or chemical in some way, neurological in some way. They actually grow the ship on a molecule-to-molecule basis. they're so light and intricately strong, like the structure of a bone would be. Everything on board the ship is intricately tied to their space-time. In other words, when they're here, it's still tied to their space-time, not ours. So it's very difficult for us to relate to it and them to relate to us in a space-time sense. And everything on board is mentally tied to their ship and to each other. So they know more about what's going on within their ship and within each other. So they are very sensitive to when they've been invaded by another entity. We've never seen an alien that is not wearing a suit. So when you see the guys with the funny eyes and a little slit for the nose and a little slit for the mouth, that's a suit. That's an environmental suit. You're not seeing the alien. And the reason why you're not seeing the alien is because they're probably butt ugly. Yeah, I mean, what's your reaction in most cases when you see that big, hairy, ugly cockroach? They understand that we have deep-seated emotional reactions to some things. They understand that. And so they're not going to show us what they look like. There's probably few human beings on the planet that have ever seen a truly stripped down alien. They know that we probably couldn't handle it yet. It's probably why we won't have a full species-to-species contact for a long time, because they see what we do when we react to other humans of different color or different culture or different religion. I mean, they watch our TV. I mean, it's sad, but it's true. So we see aliens in suits. And that's why they make contact with us as individuals in the hopes that maybe they can alter what's going on. And I covered my last item. Piece of cake. He's in Pakistan. Piece of cake. For just a little operating money, I'd go get him.
Hi. From your experience with the military and the program, I'd like to know whether there's been any study of the possibility of alternative timelines in our physical reality, if you like, and whether there's the possibility of any bleed through, if you like, from these alternative timelines into ours, which might sort of corrupt any results, you know.
I'll give you my philosophy on time. For me, all of time is an illusion. So, in my cosmology of time, all time is. That means, from the very beginning of time to the very end of time, all possibilities for everything that could ever be or ever could have been is. So, when you talk about all probabilities, they all are. They all exist. So that opens the door to multiple incarnations. So I believe in multiple incarnations, but not multiple reincarnations. So I believe that rather than being reincarnated 10,000 times, I believe I'm living 10,000 lives simultaneously. Okay, so is there a possibility for bleed through of information? Absolutely. Is there a possibility of one interfering with the other? Only in so much as it would affect my decision making. that make sense?
Can you expand on that?
Well, you know, people always say, well, if you make a prediction based on remote viewing and it happens, then everything's preconceived. And that can't be true. It's just a lucky guess. If I make a prediction and it doesn't happen, then I'm just simply wrong. Or you can look at it another way. If you make a prediction and somebody says, well, okay, we just simply will do something to make that not happen, then your prediction was wrong. Or you know, we altered the future. And my answer to that is, no, I was just simply wrong. You didn't do anything to change it. I mean, you make more out of remote viewing and predicting than it actually is. It's just simply making a good wild guess. I mean, it's not a big deal.
Thanks.
Joe, I have admired your work for many years.
Thank you.
I have talked to a lot of remote viewers who know you well, and I know that you're highly regarded and respected. On your extensive travels throughout the universe, I have only one simple question. Have you ever, in those extensive travels, like Bob Monroe made regularly, have you ever encountered what you would think of as the original creative source?
There's a lot of evidence for what I call the grand designer or the grand engineer. There's a lot of evidence for the originator or I wish I could say that I have. I've seen so much evidence for God, but I have not seen God. But in my first near-death experience, I had a classic near-death experience in 1970 where I came out of the tunnel and was enveloped by a white light. And for many, many years, I called the white light God because it was the most all-encompassing feelings of purity and completeness that I had ever felt. And it was just, I just had never felt so totally loved and complete in my whole life. And the problem was I had another near-death experience in 1985. And in the second near-death experience, I was not allowed to go to the white light. I was only allowed to see it from a distance. There were some entities that kept me local. And as much as I wanted to go to the white light, I was not allowed to. I was only allowed to view it from a distance. The problem was in the second experience, viewing it from a distance, I could see the white light had edges. And it created a huge philosophic problem for me. In my definition of God, the beginning and the end, the grand creator cannot have edges. So I had a huge philosophic problem to deal with. So I went back over all my feelings I spent a year and a half cooking on that. And the conclusion I came to is that what the white light probably is what I call the totality of self. It's what we become when we're no longer physical. It's the energy body, the energy being that we truly are when we're not physical. It's a summation of all our lives that come together. It's the reason we become sure that we know the answer to the universe. It's the summation of our knowledge. And if as an energy being, if that's what we feel as an energy being, then whatever created us, if there is a God, must be way and above, beyond that. So for me to understand what God is, I'm going to have to understand more about what the totality of self is, what I am. And as a being, I haven't begun to scratch the surface of that. And as a being, to even remotely think that I exist alone in a universe filled with life, I mean teeming with life, to think that I know anything about it is insane. And it does dishonor to the idea of God to stand up and say, I worship God, when I don't even understand the limits of what I am and what the rest of life is. It does a disservice. So my goal is to try to figure out more about what and who I am and how I can be a better human being, and find out how to interact more with the rest of life, whatever that term means, in the universe. And then by doing that, maybe honor whatever that grand engineer is. But there is evidence there is a grand engineer. I think other life out there understands it better than we do. I don't know if that answers your question.
Joe, that does answer a lot of questions. In my own summary, I think you know a hell of a lot more about the final question than you would admit. And Joe, thank you very much.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
That was very profound, so this is going to sound
I
very
can't hear you.
That was so profound that this will sound mundane, but have you ever...
Can you bring that down?
Thank you, that was very profound, and this will sound mundane, but have you ever done like in a double-blind controlled study, a thing where you were tasked to know what was in the envelope and you did your drawing? And then
Could you bring it? I can't hear you.
Okay, have you ever been tasked to do... Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
okay. So, I'm sorry. Have you ever been tasked to do something that was in the envelope and you did your drawing and it was correct, but then you found out that that actually occurred after you did the drawing, where they went and put whatever it was in the envelope after you did your remote viewing, which would confirm for me the collapse of time,
I'll tell you a cute story. One of the problems we have in the lab is that in many cases we deal with hard-nosed scientists, and in a lot of cases we like to borrow things from other labs and borrow the cooperation of other labs, in many cases overseas. We've done a lot of research in Hungary and Russia and some other places, and many of these scientists, they've heard about remote viewing, but they're not completely convinced. And we have a little travel kit on our computer that we carry. When I say we, Dr. Edwin May and I carry a little travel kit on our computer. And what it is, it's a remote viewing program, and it contains a few hundred targets. They're pictures, locations all over the world, and these are picture targets, and they're in a file. And the way the program works is we can actually do a remote viewing demonstration where we randomly select a target, and the target can be a picture, any picture out of the file. And it's an ironclad demonstration where it can't be messed with. Once you initiate the program, you do the remote viewing, you enter the data, and you have to enter the data first before it gives you the picture. So you can't cheat. This is a really difficult thing to do. Well, there's a little hook to the demonstration that we don't tell anybody about, and we let them run it. We give them the computer, we let them run it, they enter all the data and everything's done. You do the remote viewing and all this sort of thing. And at the very end of the demonstration, when you do the remote viewing, they have a last button they push, and where it displays the actual target. Just before that, the computer produces 6 targets, one of which is the real target, and they get to judge. They look at your data that you've drawn, and they get to pick, based on your drawing, which ones they think is the actual target. They judge it. They go, based on your drawings, I think this is a first place match, this is a second place match, this is a third place match, and they actually enter their judging. So when all that's done and filed, after they've judged the actual results, then they hit the last button and it says, this is the real target. So they can see how good you were, whether it was a first place match, second place match, that sort of thing. And when they hit that last button, it gives them the real result. Well, what we don't tell them is up until they hit that last button, the target doesn't exist. Okay? The random number generator does not generate the random pick until the last button's picked, the last button's hit. So those 6 judges, those 6 targets that are randomly selected, one of those will be the actual target. But the computer hasn't picked which one yet. So they don't even know. The computer doesn't even know which the target actually is until they get to the last button punched. And in many cases, most cases in fact, the remote viewing's done, the judging's done, everything's done up until that last button push, okay? In almost all cases, it's a first place match and they select the target by hitting the button.
Thank you.
Joe, a couple of questions. Many times on these talk shows, the ones you've been on, but not when you were on them, I've heard them refer to a dream George Washington had where the Chinese would be invading America. I wonder if you've ever done any remote viewing on that. That's one. I got a couple other questions too. And
No,
if you haven't, you may
I've not heard
sometime.
that. No.
Oh yeah, it's been mentioned several times. Another thing is this, when I was at the UFO Museum in Roswell about 6 years ago, I saw 2 old gentlemen in the inside, and I asked them, "Have you seen a UFO?" And they says, "Oh yeah, we were on the Bataan Death March, and 2 giant cylinders swooped down over us and took off." That's probably something you never heard of, but maybe you might remote view that.
Probably true, yeah.
And finally, if you've ever remote viewed this or might, the neocons who fill out the Bush administration, who in fact were the ones that got him to run for president in the first place, are now demanding that we invade Iran and Syria. Do you see that happening, or have you ever remote viewed that? Do you have any comments?
Well, actually, there's a prediction in my Ultimate Time Machine that predicts further expansion of the war in Iraq. But it'll be based on some other actions, but eventually I see that happening in the Middle East.
With regard to human-made craft that are considered UFOs, have you done, or anybody you know done, any remote viewing that indicates that the technology used in those approaches the alien-made UFO craft in any way?
I've done very little. I've actually done very little targeting of anything that suggests alien-built craft, but I have done some targeting of craft that I think are U.S.-made. In 1960, latter part of '65, early '66, when I was stationed in Eleuthera in the Bahamas, I was illuminated by a craft. I and a partner that was stationed there with me, we were an air-sea rescue unit, and we were going back to our quarters very late at night. It's probably 1 o'clock in the morning, and we were crossing some sand dunes. We were actually taking a shortcut. Eleuthera is a very narrow island, and it's probably half a mile wide at the point where we were living. And we're crossing sand dunes at a tracking site there, a downrange tracking site at Governor's Harbor. And in the middle of the sand dunes, we were suddenly illuminated by something. And we looked up, and there was a disc, probably, I don't know, 130 feet across, hovering directly above us. And we were caught in this cone of illumination. And it was like being in a bell jar. You suddenly couldn't hear anything. No waves. The waves were right there on the ocean side. We couldn't hear it breaking on the shore. And the whole event lasted maybe 30 seconds. And you could see panel lines in it, opaque windows and that sort of thing. And our sense was that the light winked out and we saw it shoot over the horizon. And his name was Steve. He and I looked at each other, didn't say a word, went back to the bar and proceeded to get drunk. And we discussed it, and our decision was not to tell anybody because we were both in the Army and we didn't want to get shipped out to Southeast Asia. And the problem was the next morning we both got up, we were both sick. We were both violently ill, and we had severe radiation burns. And the problem was he was very, very sick because I was the diver in the unit, and I had logged probably 1,000 hours of diving up until then. So I was pretty dark. I was dark brown from the sun, so I didn't get burned badly. I just had to take iodine for a week. But they shipped him off to Homestead Air Force Base for 2 weeks, and to this day he has an imprint of his shirt burned into his chest, and he can't go out in the sun. He's sun sensitive. And the other part about it was interesting is for about 2 years, all he could remember was he had memories of a radiator blowing up in his face, a truck radiator. And the problem was we had no truck. I remembered everything in detail except I just had a memory of us being irradiated. And there might be a whole lot of other things that happened, but I don't have any memory of it. But I thought it was kind of interesting. I think it was our craft. I don't think it was alien. So there's that. There's a couple other events that I've experienced that I think probably have to do with our craft. I mean, we're pretty sloppy. I think we build things and then try them out. And we hurt people with them. The aliens aren't that way. They don't do that sort of thing. It's not my sense that they do that sort of thing. And then the other part of it with aliens is that they leave you with good feelings. They don't go away leaving you with bad feelings.
Yeah.
The other thing, I've had a couple interactions in my home with aliens. And I didn't even notice that they were going on, except my cats told me. My cats notice aliens before I do. And I've had aliens cutting through my house. I don't know if they're going somewhere or if they're doing something, but my cats have forewarned me by growling. But now they don't growl anymore, they just notice. And
Thank you.
When you said a while ago that the alien spacecraft, that so many of them were ours, because the alien spacecraft didn't cause damage, but ours caused damage. Mm-hmm. What did you mean by that?
What I mean is that we're building craft that we call UFOs because we don't know what else to call them. We see them in the sky and they're doing funny things, so we call them UFOs. But they're not alien. There's things we build in a factory somewhere or build underground, and we're building them, but they're not alien origin. Like we're building saucers basically. We're building craft that look like saucers. Like one of the things that I'm not sure everybody understands this, but I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but like the B-2 bomber. The B-2 bomber probably with its engine configuration and bomb load and weight and everything probably can't get off the ground. I don't know if you're aware of that or not. It can't fly. So how does it get off the ground? No, it actually uses modern technology. It uses electrostatic energy to create a corona around itself. It actually gets more lift that way. It gets a 30% increase in lift. But the corona that it creates causes it to look round in the sky at night.
So you think then that we are building several different types of crafts? For example...
No, I think we see the B-2 bomber flying, and it's slightly illuminated by the electrostatic corona, and we think it's a UFO. And then we mix that data in with alien craft. So we're mixing data. We're creating our own disinformation file. And you see, it causes a problem for us. You understand what I'm saying? So we have to, it's kind of like the same problem that we suffered during the war, during all our wars. When we have plane spotters, you have to take people and you have to teach them the skill of differentiating between them and us. Teaching people the skills of identifying real alien craft from non-alien craft, because things start looking very similar.
So like when they reported the lights over Phoenix and that supposedly huge craft, you think that could have been just one of ours?
It could be an alien craft. I'm not saying it might or might not be. It depends on the circumstance. I'm just saying that you got to be really careful not to leap to a conclusion based on insufficient data. That's all.
Joe, what about the benevolent space brothers that Adamski used to describe to us, and that all the planets in our solar system are occupied and we don't hear about them. All we hear about is the bad guys. Have you viewed that?
I think it's just like us here. There are some good guys and there are some bad guys. And it's like remote viewing. I wish I could say that everybody who's a really good or exceptional remote viewer is a good guy. They're not. There's a lot of people out there that are remote viewing that are not good guys. And in October of 2000, I went to Russia. I spent 3 weeks in the Russian remote viewing facility, and I met all my counterparts. And I don't talk about it because I promised I wouldn't. And maybe one day I'll get permission to do that. But I met some very, very nice people. And they're male and female. And they're excellent remote viewers. And I met remote viewers in Budapest, Hungary. And I met remote viewers that are Chinese. And I met remote viewers that are Italian. And I met remote viewers that are Israeli. I've met really good remote viewers. And if you think there are only good remote viewers, you're wrong. There are probably remote viewers that are working for Al-Qaeda. There are bad remote viewers too. Same with the aliens.
Is the claim that every planet in our solar system is inhabited? Is it
Might be.
Pardon?
There might be. And there are good people and there are bad people. I mean, the universe in my mind is teeming with life. And that's from the smallest microbe all the way up to intelligent beings. And to assume otherwise, I think, is foolishness. I would assume just the opposite. I think that the universe is teeming with life. And
just one question. Have you remote viewed?
I can't hear.
Have you remote viewed Pine Gap
Pine Gap,
in Australia?
Australia? I don't have to. I know what goes on at Pine Gap. I can't say. I can't say or expand on it. Yeah, I don't think you have to worry about Pine Gap, though. I'll tell you that. Honestly, don't have to. Thank you.